For most people in Boston, the West End was a neighborhood that was demolished for urban renewal more than 50 years ago. 50 years later, it's an area that's still going through changes, and our guest has been tracking the changes with her camera. The photos are at the West End Museum, and the exhibit's called The New West Enders and Other Green Monsters. We'd like to welcome the photographer, who's also one of the new West Enders, Lolita Parker Jr. Thank you very much for being with us, Lolita.
Thank you.
First of all, talk about living in the West End. I know you're not a Boston native, but you know, sometimes I drive by there. Is that really a neighborhood?
Yes, it is really a neighborhood. I've been there since 1998, and there's a lot of families that live there, but we're somewhat invisible because Mass General Hospital rents, leases, owns so much of the first floor buildings there in the neighborhood. You don't get the sense of all the families that are there.
But what about the atmosphere of this neighborhood? Because this is not just from where people live. You've got things going on. You've got the TD Garden. You've got the jail.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, all those things happen, and it makes it an interesting place to live because there are all the bars. And as a matter of fact, when my children were growing up and I wanted to take them out to eat in the evening, we usually ended up in the eating section of a bar. So that is a little different. There's a lot of, I was not a sports fan when I moved to Boston, and I can credit living in the West End with all of the sports bars and constantly hearing that talk around me. And, you know, I can't say I'm super interested in sports, but I did learn that they are important here. Pay attention.
Ask you one of your shots, because it's a shot of three sports fans, and you know, when I think about sports fans, I think of loud white guys in a bar, but
Yes.
this is a little different.
It is different. You know, there are a lot of loud white guys in our neighborhood, and it's funny you should mention that because I had sort of a new experience. A lot of our neighbors, we get nervous when it's a hockey game. You know, we've been called names, we've had things thrown at us. Things happen when people get drunk. And yesterday I went to the Patriots, and there were several drunk, loud white guys who were actually looking out for me against some of their, you know, less evolved brothers. And it was a new experience for me in the neighborhood. I have to say it really turned me around in a way I wasn't expecting just to go cover the parade.
Well, the three young men that you photographed out of a Celtics game, you also wanted us to look at that in the context of Black Lives Matter. Because they look sort of ordinary. They're just like the kind of people who want to watch a game at the Garden.
Exactly. But they're also three young men who, you know, turn down the wrong street in Brookline and, you know, get pulled over.
Exactly the same. I want to ask you about the street life in this neighborhood. And until a few years ago, part of that was a little bit like Washington Street in the L days, Roxbury and Jamaica Plain.
I'm really fortunate that I came to live in the West End while the tracks were still up. I come from Los Angeles, and where everything is very generic. And so to come into a neighborhood with the tracks and the light and the shadow and the screeching, and it was annoying because the trains literally ran right outside my bedroom. We could make eye contact. Our family used to play a game. Can you make eye contact with somebody on the train? But it was also from 5:30 in the morning till 12:30 in the morning. You heard the constant screech, screech, screech of the trains going by.
I love this black and white shot here with the vapor in the street.
This photograph is interesting to me because it was one of the last photographs I took with film, and it's taken on I think on the corner of Friend and Causeway Street, and the three men are big dig workers going to get their coffee. And so it really, I mean, coming from getting their coffee. So it really does talk about that change that was happening. You know, the big dig was going on, there was plans to demolish the L, and yet there was still all this atmosphere in the neighborhood.
Talk about taking down the L, though, because I remember the Orange Line, it was a long process. You said this happened just a few days?
This happened over, I mean, you know, it happened in stages, but the actual station of North Station and these tracks that you see now up to the what's called the last tenement, those came down over a weekend in 2004, like September 9th, 10th, and 11th of September of 2004. And it was literally like someone took the roof off the neighborhood. It was very disorienting, and I actually was late to work that day because I wanted to come to the commuter rail station and see people come out of the commuter rail station where Friday there had been this big station there, and now Monday it's gone. And people were just stunned. And I was quoted once as saying the pigeons were very confused. They were walking around in circles because you don't think about it, but generations of pigeons had called this, you know, under these tracks their home.
I know they still have the pigeons at Dudley Street, even though the trains are gone. I want to ask you, though, about this area and the atmosphere, because I can imagine you go to sleep at night, you hear the trolleys squeaking, and then it's not there.
Well, when I first moved there, I thought that it would take me, I said, oh, well, it's noisy. I had moved from another neighborhood in Boston that was going through a lot of, well, let's just squash that because that's too long of a story. Going through a transformation. And this neighborhood was just like something out of a movie. And, you know, growing up in Hollywood, you know, being totally addicted to black and white movies and all the characters that lived and, you know, worked sort of under the tracks.
The home of film noir.
Right, and, you know, there was a lot of homeless people in the neighborhood who have since, you know, moved. Some are still there. There's been some homeless people in that neighborhood on the same corner for 16 years. And they came to know my family. You know, they would ask about my children. I told my children I didn't want them what I called the drunken sailor on the town side of the street with all the bars, and I wanted them to walk on the Tip O'Neill side of the street. And so sometimes they would want to go to 7-Eleven, and they would say, you better get out of here, I'm going to tell your mother. So
you've been to some other happenings in the neighborhood that I don't think of as necessarily neighborhood events, but I guess they were. Democratic National Convention back in, what was it,
2004. That was a big one. Of course, it was a big one. I actually was there on night 2, and it wasn't televised. But that was the night where a local girl was chosen out of, you know, a lot of young people in Boston to do the opening gavel of the DNC. Her name was Kristen Turner, and it ended up being Maya Angelou and Ruby Dee and Barack Obama and you know, Jesse Jackson. You just name all of these black people who came to speak that night. And like I said, it wasn't televised, and I happened to get a floor pass, which is another, everything's a long story with me, but I had a floor pass, which meant I could not sit down. I had to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And just before Obama was going to speak, I didn't know who he was. A woman delegate in the 6th row said, you know what, I've been seeing you. Why don't you sit next to me? And I did, and that's how I was able to capture the images.
Tell me about your impression of Obama.
I wouldn't say I'm jaded, but I can say I don't get excited because as a photographer, you go to so many venues and you see so many speakers and hear so many things. But literally, I was up on my feet. It was when he first started speaking, like the Democratic National Convention to me was a huge party, always noisy. And unless a speaker really had a commanding presence, all the little side conversations would keep going on. When Obama got up to speak, when he started speaking, you could hear the room getting, the hall getting quieter and quieter until he had everybody in the palm of his hands. And then he just kept knocking these, you know, words out of the park, and the Fleet Center, as it was called then, exploded.
Finally, you're going there as a photographer, and I've had a little exposure to this, that there could be very important things being said, very memorable things, and I'm trying to get this into focus. You know, I mean, your mind isn't all the way there.
Exactly. I actually have found some YouTube footage of myself when Obama's giving the speech. It actually looks like I'm heckling him. I don't know why I had this big yellow bow on my head that day. I don't know. Another one of those.
Just finally, reminder of viewers, how long are your photos going to be up at the museum there?
They'll be there until, we just was extended till March 21st, and I'm going to have a closing reception on February 28th from 7 to 9 p.m.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Lolita Parker Jr. Up ahead, the Dorchester Report with Bill Forey.